Hey there, what is happening everybody? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and in no surprise, we're continuing to talk about Metroid because right now it is the only thing that I have any interest in, and I actually want to talk about how likely it is that Nintendo may actually make available some of the prior Metroid games leading into the release of Metroid Dread. This has been a huge and very popular topic for a lot of people because with the world refocused on Metroid again for the first time in way too long, we have a lot of people who are excited to play, of course, Metroid Dread, which is Metroid 5, the first new game in so many years, the first time the story is actually moving forward in the timeline in close to 20 years. And with that, we have a lot of people thinking about either replaying old Metroid games or playing old Metroid games for the first time. Of course, that second option is really the coolest and most important fact, I think, because what we're seeing is the interest in Metroid Dread being so strong that it's actually convincing a lot of people to want to play the franchise for the first time. And a lot of people have already been doing that. Trust me, as somebody who always talks about Metroid on this channel, and this goes back going years before Metroid Dread was even announced, I have a lot of people who are sharing their Metroid experiences with me, and I know a lot of people are already starting to dive into the old games for the first time. And so we're seeing Metroid Dread show that the fan base for the franchise is going to grow just because this great looking new game is coming to the super popular Switch, and it's a win all around. But what about those people who maybe want to get into these games or even replay them for the first time in years, but who don't have easy access to them? That's where some smart business decisions from Nintendo could actually make this an easier thing for these people. As always, before we jump any deeper into the Metroid topic, I like to remind you guys I'm always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I upload several videos a week, and I usually live stream around once a week. I discuss all things Nintendo, I cover every single little thing about Metroid possible, and I discuss all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. So what do we do about these classic Metroid games that everybody wants to play? Whether you're focusing on the 2D games, the numbered games 1, 2, 3, and 4 leading into Metroid Dread, or if you also want to wrap in some of the 3D games, like obviously the Prime games, Metroid Other M, even some of the spin-offs like a Federation Force or a Hunters, it would certainly be nice if Metroid fans had access to these games on the Switch. Now, of course, the first thing we think of is the Nintendo Online service, which has already made available NES and Super NES games on it, and that sure is a hot button topic, man, because people have some very passionate and distinct and divisive opinions about the Switch Online service. And more than even being divisive, I would even argue that most people are just straight up down on it. They hate it, they complain about it, they don't think it's a good value. And I get it, there's definitely some problems there, I think, when you compare it to the other relative services. I personally don't really care. I pay them $20 a year, and I know I can just play games online, and if I ever get a wild hair up my butt and I want to pull up an NES or an SNES game, I can do it. And so for that reason, I'm like, it's fine. It's worth the $20. I'm paying Microsoft and Sony way more than that every year, and I don't use their services any more or less than I do Nintendo's. So to me, it's whatever. But of course, if we focus this back on the Metroid topic, we realize that between most of Nintendo's prior consoles, there are opportunities for them to make some of these Metroid games available. And, like we said at the beginning here, a lot of people would like to play these games. I should speak to the people who maybe would be playing these games for the first time, people who are new to the Metroid franchise, the folks out there who are so excited about Metroid Dread that they're going to play that as their first game, or it's convincing them to play the series for the first time, so they want to go back and play Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion and Metroid Prime and all these other games, Samus Returns, whatever the case. A, I think it's great. B, welcome to the fandom because you are in for a great surprise with how fantastic this franchise is. And C, I actually think there's a good chance you're going to get your wish. It should be noted with Metroid Dread that Sakamoto has already confirmed that there will be a pretty convenient story recap that's going to be able to catch you up to speed with what's happening with Samus and her journey throughout the prior games leading up to Metroid Dread. So that's very cool. There are some really great events in the overall story that will obviously matter to Metroid Dread. If you've been watching my theory videos, you know how deep the lore in the story really goes. But I also think that one of the strongest points about the Metroid franchise is that while there are sequential events and character development for Samus and a story to follow, it's also not a very story-intensive game, right? I think a lot of Metroid fans who are familiar with it would maybe agree with this. Like, yes, there are events to follow, and if you know those events, it's cool and it's going to heighten your experience. But Metroid has also always been gameplay before story, even though they've taken some kind of branching paths and tried to make the story more important. It really just comes down to a fun, awesome sci-fi adventure action series with some puzzle solving, some backtracking, and a kick-ass protagonist that is Samus. And so you truly can survive the experience of Metroid Dread without knowing anything about the franchise going into it. So I don't want that to deter anyone that maybe is worried about trying to play every game before they play Metroid Dread. I can guarantee you're not going to have to do it. The way I've always kind of surmised the overall Metroid experience in the universe that is the games currently is that Metroid is less about story and more about lore. The lore and the history of the universe and the galaxy and everything that happens within the events of all the games is definitely there and present and meaty and really cool, but the story really isn't what it's about. It's not so much about this character says this to this other character and then they go here and they do that thing and then, oh my god, the big climax equals this outcome. Like, yes, those elements are present, but it's not the meat of it. The lore, the history about the X-Parasites and the Chozo and the Metroids and all that stuff that we've been talking about on this channel for weeks now, that's more present. And the games, with a couple of exceptions to be fair, like Metroid Fusion and Metroid Other M, for the most part, the games really just make the lore and the history of the universe available to you to read and find and seek out if you want. But if you ignore a lot of that, you still end up playing fantastic games from beginning to end without even really knowing what's happening in the story, and it doesn't really hurt the experience. But of course, if you learn the story, if you learn and read the lore, and you pay attention to the events that do matter from game to game, you do only heighten and complement your experience, and that is a really cool thing about the franchise. And of course, I got so excited about talking about Metroid and my love of the franchise that I kind of got sidetracked a little bit from the main purpose of this video and this conversation, which is about Nintendo's willingness or ability to make any of these other old games available. Right now, if you want to play most of the prior Metroid games, you're going to need a Nintendo Wii, you're going to need a Wii U, you're going to need a GameCube, you're going to need a Game Boy Advance or a Game Boy. You're going to need all of these old consoles, which is cool and something that a lot of us do have, but it would also be nice if a lot or most of these games were just made available on the Switch in some way. Right now, because of the NES and SNES games, you can play the original Metroid on the NES, and you can play Super Metroid on the SNES, which is fantastic because many people consider that to be the best Metroid game, and it is definitely like in the top 3 for me. It's an absolute masterpiece of a game. But shouldn't Nintendo make it easier for these other games to be available? And I think the answer is yes, they should, and I also think the answer is yes, they will. Now, I'm going to admit to you guys that I don't know anything about this. I just happen to personally believe that Nintendo will not miss an opportunity to make some other prior platforms available on the online service. Whether you're talking about Game Boy Advance or N64 games, hopefully GameCube games, stuff like that, or even straight up re-releases of things like a Metroid Prime Trilogy, for example, I think that these things are going to happen. In fact, Furukawa recently said at an investors meeting that they're already looking into ideas to strengthen the online membership. Here's a translation of what he recently said about this. He says, quote, Nintendo started the Nintendo Switch Online service in September 2018 for Nintendo Switch users. People with memberships can play games with their friends online, such as titles like Animal Crossing New Horizons. In addition, they can play some of the games that were released for the NES and the SNES. Membership in this service exceeds 26 million paying accounts in September of last year and is still growing steadily in step with the increase in Nintendo Switch system sales. For Nintendo Switch Online, it's important to not only increase the number of new members, but also to encourage existing members to continue using the service. So we are working on increasing the appeal of the service to make it even more fun and convenient to play with Nintendo Switch. So basically, if you parse out the most important elements of that quote and what he's saying there, it's the idea that they're trying and working to make the Nintendo Switch Online service even more appealing than it already is. Not just for people who they want to sign up for the service, but for the people who are already using it. And those are big deal statements, you guys, because to me, that means the number one thing they could do to, quote, increase the appeal of the service is bring classic consoles over. They need more than just NES and Super NES. Obviously, N64 is a high priority for many of us, high likelihood to happen, and sadly there are no Metroid games on the N64. So we really have to focus on the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube. If they nail Game Boy Advance and GameCube games, then look out, because Metroid Fusion, Metroid Zero Mission, and all 3 Metroid Prime games are definitely going to be coming to that service. Obviously, I think that some retail possibilities for prior Metroid games is also something that we should consider Nintendo doing. I know some people may be upset with that because they would rather have them available on the online service they're already paying for. I personally like my physical media. I also love the idea of throwing my money at the Metroid franchise so that Nintendo knows how valuable it is and profitable it is and how much people want it by giving us our dollar for it. And so if they release a Metroid Prime Trilogy, retail package of some kind, or a collection of prior games like get the Zero Mission, Samus Returns, and Fusion collection for $60, whatever they might do there, man, I'm gonna buy the hell out of those. And those also have a chance at happening. I think that if I was to really guess the most likely outcome, it would be for the Metroid Prime Trilogy to be made available in some sort of retail package, probably for $60, full price, and for the Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, and DS line of games and consoles to come over to the system, which would make all of the other 2D games available. And so to me, if they did something like that, it's a win all around, and all of us out there that want to play these Metroid games again, either to replay them or for the first time, that's the way I think Nintendo will probably do this. So these are just my thoughts and theories about what's going on and what could happen here to make it easier for fans to play the prior Metroid games, hopefully on the Switch where everyone and their mother has one. Like I said, I don't know anything about the online service plans. I'm just going off of this quotes and the same kind of guesses and theories that everyone else is putting out there. I kind of think that it just makes too much sense for them to not do. Granted, they also have to make these choices pretty quickly here, within like 3 months' time, to get this stuff out and available to people before Metroid Dread releases. So that does kind of work against it as far as making these games available before Metroid Dread comes out. I hope they're smart enough to make this choice like in the next 2 or 3 weeks, but knowing Nintendo, sometimes they're a little bit boneheaded with these things, so maybe it doesn't happen for some time to come. We'll have to see. But I want to hear from you. Is this something you're interested in? Have you already played these games? Would you be playing them for the first time, and so Nintendo might be missing an opportunity to make it easier for you? Will Metroid Dread be your first Metroid game? Whatever you think about it, talk about it below. With that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.